time for a few questions. Leslie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your inspirational talk. I want to know why the Black Caucus. I never hear. They have sold out black people, in my mind, and I never hear any of this out of the Black Caucus.
And it's really interesting. One is because black folks do not hold our legislators accountable. Many of them achieved their positions as an outcome of the civil rights movement. And I had to answer this question right before Congress. This was one that was asked by one of the congressmen, too. And I think there's another tradition, and I hate to sound anti-religious, but there's another tradition we have in the black community that says, well, you know, we'll leave it to Jesus, and by things will be. No, I'm not being facetious. I'm not saying. There's the assumption that things will work out in the better. And so therefore you have black folks identifying with the underdog, reaching out and playing a cooperative game, while the other cooperative partners are playing zero-sum games. And this is and then you get a black president, and who's also not held accountable by black folks. It's a vicious cycle, and it's part of our own fault. There's no justice, I say, until just us, meaning African Americans, begin to take hold and to bring these accountability factors. We're not there yet. I'm hoping. I don't know what it's going to take, but those are factors that play out, and it's different. It's interesting, different because at the grassroots level, further down, you have black folks who are concerned. Now, not on Obama, but on the certainly the immigration issue.
Regarding affirmative action, some years ago, I think it was the Jewish Journal of Los Angeles. I'm not 100% sure that they had an article about affirmative action. It might have even been written by in which affirmative action was discussed. It may have been Alan Dershowitz. I can't remember the details, but anyway, I objected to the article in the sense that I wrote a letter to the editor and I said, I used to support affirmative action when it first came out because it was meant to apply to people who had been historically disadvantaged by things like the Jim Crow laws and whatnot for long periods of time, Americans who have been disadvantaged. But at this point in time, we basically had affirmative action for immigrants in California. It was no longer affirmative action for the people for whom it was originally intended, and I think I quoted a number like 80 or 90% of the affirmative action programs are going to immigrants in California, and so they sent me back a response saying, well, what's your documentation for this, and what are the numbers? So I sent them back an expanded version of this letter with all kinds of documentation, and nothing ever got published.
Amen, Ben. You're absolutely. I didn't bring that point out, but you're absolutely right. Because one of the few times I've been on the front page of the New York Times was April 22nd, 1992, with a study that I did when I was on the Council of Graduate Schools and president of the Council of Historically Black Graduate Schools, which pointed out the low rate of African American doctorates and also some of the reasons for that. I've served also on the ETS board, and one of the things that we find is that there are abuses but in the American Academy, of ignorance that is not known, that they don't know it in the way they use the ETS scores, the GRE and others. There's the assumption that they're testing aptitude when they're testing achievement. And there's the assumption, so therefore, also that ignores the fact that in many other countries there are publicly supported Kaplan-type kinds of things that gear their students, especially from South Asia and from China, toward these particular tests, which are tests of achievement that come to our university, and so therefore there is the assumption. And also I pointed out, and it's also true if those of us who really are truthful know the academy, that there is a sort of much greater of a status kind of factor that goes into where students are from. I mean, it's great to be bragging that, that my students or research students are from Beijing or Jakarta, or much better than 14th and U, or Central Harlem, or Harlan County, and also the deference that foreign students give to and who give to professors. Believe it or not, maybe with exception of Ben Zuckerman and my colleague here, they're big egos. And so they're reinforced in a culture that really sort of values that. So there are many factors that are going into this, and of which the assumption that American students, and Norm Matloff really from David really could address this. American students are not the best and not the brightest, and the foreign students, we're losing this battle. It's often because of choices that we've been making to give American funds to privilege students from India who are almost 95% Brahmins who've been privileged, over our own American students who simply do not have the same kind of opportunity. Ben,
Bill Ryerson.
Could I just add one? Sorry, is that okay, Bill? Yeah. Well, firstly, I agree essentially with everything you just said, Frank, but I would say one additional thing, which is related, I think, to overpopulation, is because the Chinese and Indian populations are so gigantically large, there are a lot of smart people in these countries, and they are competing desperately to get to rise to the top of their university system and our university system. So they do have a lot of smart people to send over here, but just because they have so many people, period. And so it is hard to compete against them in many cases, just from their sheer numbers.
We're trying to stay on program here, so we're just going to have time for one more question in this segment.
I mean, this report by the Bureau of the Budget to the Obama administration should have put a chill up everybody's back in the country, not just the politicians. I think ultimately they'd be the last ones to get the word. But when you're talking about the fact that this recession, we may be just at the beginning of another one, and they are projecting things that the best they could hope for is an unemployment rate of 8.5% in 2014. I don't know how long. You're going to see rumbles in all of our cities right now about people at the grassroots who don't have jobs, across all racial groups, many educational groups. I mean, I don't know how a president, including my president of my university and the senator from my state, can make these statements. It's frightening, because I know that if you go into any of these unemployment bureaus where the people who are receiving unemployment insurance, in Ithaca, for example, which is a pretty high educated community, those people receiving unemployment insurance have to show up once every couple of weeks to show that they're available, go to these sessions. In those sessions are people with PhDs, physicists, agronomists, a massive number of college graduates already, say nothing of the people with the high school diplomas and all the rest of it. I mean, a job is a pretty valuable thing. And if our politicians don't get the message soon that having a job is the most important thing this economy has to offer, I mean, the rest of the constitutional things are all nice, freedom of religion and press and all the rest of it. But if you don't have a job, most of those things don't mean very much. And by and large, we need to focus on a full employment strategy, and one that is not just jobs at any cost. I'm certainly familiar with what Ben is saying here. There are things we've got to have to do to deal with what kind of jobs we create and what people do. But the idea of the indifference that we have to enforce our immigration policy is just staggering to me. And it's not just the governor of Vermont. Why doesn't the president, every time he come on with his job strategy, doesn't mention the word immigration at all? Yeah. They talk about the economy, and later what about immigration? Immigration is an economic issue. Yeah. Job. That's what Samuel Gompers said. Fundamentally, that's what immigration is. When you have talking about immigration, how many workers do you need, and what type of skills do they have?
Can I just simply say that there's really two ominous trends too that the economists have really pointed out that governors should really be aware of. First was Alan Binder's work pointing out that over the next few years, between 28 and 34 million American jobs are subject to outsourcing, and these are higher order, jobs we're not talking about call centers. We're talking about image reading, engineering, architecture, and numerous other kinds of things. So basically, the jobs, and so therefore, we should be really clear that because the lower level jobs are needed by Americans. There's 7 million Americans, 7 million illegal workers who are working at jobs. 14 million Americans are unemployed, and 25 million if we use the U6. This is reality. Four workers, 4.8, according to the Institute for Economic Studies, are for every American job opening. These are the kinds of things that so-called liberal people continue to ignore. And I think it's probably because they value others. They think that others are going to be more qualified, or more desirable, or better workers. And this is a bias. This is an anti-American bias against our own people that's not reinforced by the facts. And as Norm points out, it's not very clear that these smart people are really better. This is what is interesting, especially if we look at the H-1B visa process.
I know Leslie wanted to make a quick comment, and then Ben, I think you wanted to make one as well. Then we'll move on.
Yes, I did with respect to your question. It's very hard to sue a government for not implementing a law. It's really tough. That being said, I will note that in my research, the Open Borders crowd has brought many, many cases over the years, some of which seem really crazy, did get thrown out of court, but they keep going. They have very successfully used the courts as part of their strategy to change public opinion. The courts have begun to change, at least in part, because of a deliberate decision to use the court system, even when it seems like there's a very flimsy cause. The final thing I would note is the comments about our labor market, our employment situation, and the progressives' refusals to look at immigration and population's growth impact on the environment just shows what a rabbit hole the left has fallen down over the last 40 years. You have to wonder what really happened to the left.
One of the problems that I think our side has with bringing legal cases is the issue that we run into with standing over and over again, which is one of the reasons why I think the state legislation technique is something that works. To get a state bill, dealing with these issues, as opposed to not as opposed, but just as another tool. I know that's something that Mike could speak to, and he's dealt with those issues for years. But that being said, I think it is a good thing to at least try to bring these cases. And I think Leslie's exactly right. The other side's been very successful with that. So, and Ben.
Just briefly, a lot of the people we're talking about who have these positions that we just absolutely can't understand in terms of their moral and ethical standing. It's the elite. Most of my friends are progressives, and most of them actually feel the way most people in this room do. It's not like they're actually agreeing with the elite to take these positions that seem crazy to us. So there's this disconnect between the elite and the hoi polloi, and it's our side that does have the moral high ground, because we're the ones who are concerned about poor people of all colors in this country, both citizens and legal immigrants, and we're the ones who have the moral high ground, in spite of what our opponents always the way they always try and paint us.